So, crazy rich Asians, but there's no hyphen. So, the crazy doesn't actually modify the rich. So, they're not saying that they're crazy rich. The crazy modifies the Asians. So, they're saying that the Asians are crazy. Anyway, it's a terrible title, no matter what. Okay? Hello everyone, Riley here, and today's movie is Crazy Rich Asians. Now, Crazy Rich Asians stars Constance Wu as an economics professor at NYU who is in love with a man played by Henry Golding. And it's kind of about how Constance Wu has to meet Henry Golding's family, who live in Singapore and just so happen to be the most famous and the richest, basically like the royal family of Singapore. And she had no idea of all of this, and it's about the cultural divide and meeting an eclectic group of really, really rich people. And it's kind of about how Henry Golding's family is not very receiving to her because they are fearing their status and they're fearing the way that her becoming a part of the family may actually taint their name. Now, I thought the trailers were pretty good, but my anticipation was not very high, primarily because Jon M. Chu directed it. The guy behind such cinematic masterpieces as Step Up 3D, Justin Bieber, Never Say Never, and Gem and the Holograms. Yeah, not the best track record. Now, he did direct Now You See Me Too, which was okay, but if an okay movie is the best out of your long reign of garbage, not the best, yeah, not the best track record. However, this movie is great. It is fantastic, and it works on almost all accords, and Jon M. Chu actually made a very good movie, and it is actually very well directed, surprisingly. Now, this movie, the heart and soul of it is the characters, and especially the relationship between Constance Wu and Henry Golding. The two of them are just dynamic together, and you instantly feel the connection and how and why they love each other, and you instantly root for them, and they both feel like real people, and the connections that they have together really works well, and it's a great part of this movie, and it makes the main storyline of this movie fit, and it makes it feel like there's some emotional stakes behind it. For his acting debut, Henry Golding is really good in this movie. So is Constance Wu, and overall, the supporting cast is fantastic, and there are so many great characters in this movie. Now, this movie has a giant ensemble cast. Some of the standouts being Awkwafina in what is by far her best performance to date. She crushes it and is hysterical in every single scene in this movie, and her timing is so good. Jimmy O Yang, who was in Patriots Day, was great in that, plays a completely different character, and he's hysterical for completely different reasons, and he's just magnetic, even though he's a little over the top, but it's kind of what you need. The guy who played the stylist, he's great. Ken Jeong does really well, and there was a surprise appearance of Harry Shum Jr., which that was surprising to me because I didn't know he was in the movie, but overall, the entire supporting cast is fantastic, and there are a lot of really cool, really interesting characters who all have their moments to shine. It doesn't feel like any one of them really gets slighted in a way, and it feels like the entire supporting cast is really rich, and they really add a whole lot of world to this movie. Another thing this movie does great is depict the culture really well, and it has a lot of cool things to say about what culture really is, because Constance Wu's character is American born. She was always lived in New York, but she still speaks Chinese. She still has a lot of the customs, but she lives her life as an American. And how that is juxtaposed with Henry Golding's family, who lives in Singapore, who kind of look down on her for the American way, and how they don't feel like she really respects family or traditions enough, even though that's kind of been a part of her life in the American way. And I think the way that they wove together the different cultures and showed just generally how these new style cultural divides, where we've seen cultural divides millions of times, but in this more different new style way, I thought that was really fascinating to watch. A lot of this movie has to do with Michelle Yeoh as Henry Golding's mother, who is very much the main driving force who is disapproving of Constance Wu and their relationship. Now, we've seen this hundreds of times in movies where the mother doesn't really like the relationship of the children, and almost all the time it comes across as completely cartoony and just completely over the top, and she becomes a caricature. And I'm glad to say that in this movie, that completely worked, where her character felt organic. You saw where she was coming from. She felt like a real person, and she had a lot of emotional depth to her, which I was gladly surprised by in this movie, because when I saw what they were doing with her character, I was like, great, it's just going to be another one of those cookie cutter. Basically, all I could think of is that she was going to be the same thing as Christine Baranski in Bad Moms 2. That was how I was initially fearing, but then it ended up becoming great. This movie is hysterical, but it's hysterical in a natural way, where the characters are just naturally funny, and it feels organic into the situations. It's not like they're really trying to shove jokes in there. It's just natural humor coming from very witty people. That has to do a lot with the great, smart dialogue that is really well done, and except for one specific scene towards the end where there's an emotional scene that is kind of broken by a comedic bit that wasn't really that funny, I think overall for the rest of the movie, the humor works really well, and the tone, it hits really a great mix of the tone. This feels very tonally and stylistically similar to Love, Simon, which was directed by Greg Berlanti earlier this year. So I think if you know what that movie is or the style of that, it really much feels like that. Another thing about this movie, the visuals are impeccable. The costume design specifically is so good. It's stunning and gorgeous to look at. And pretty much across the board, all of the visuals, the cinematography is really good. There's a lot of vivid colors in this movie, but not in an over kind of way. They do it to the right extent. And the production design is great. And overall, visually, this movie looks really, really good. And especially during this wedding scene at the end, this shot of her going down the aisle. Oh my god, that shot is insane. Now, no movie's perfect, so I do have a couple of negatives about this movie. One, I think it's a little too long.